In this video I'm going to be sharing with you some very useful pivot stats. Some of these I've shared before in previous videos, parts of at least, giving you the principles behind them. In this video I'm going to just show you an extra couple of stats that I've been working on recently, mainly to prove whether I was right or wrong as much as anything else. But no, it was I'd been seeing something in the markets and I identified it, and I thought I just need to test that out and see what the stats are really like on it. So here we go. Some of these stats are relatively in their rawish form, so just bear that in mind if you wanted to reduce time frames and things like this. And also I'm looking at the daily pivots and the stats surrounding the daily pivots here. If you wanted to change it and look at the 4-hourly or the weekly, there is a difference. Certainly in the 4-hourly, the weeklies are much closer to dailies as are the monthly pivots. The pivots themselves, if you don't know exactly what they are, I've produced another video on pivots which you'll find within my watch list. But this one here, then, I'm assuming you understand what pivots are. We've got basically three majors, and well, there's a fourth level of support and resistance. They provide support and resistance, and most traders trade them in that method, using that method. So a lot of the time the price action is constrained by the support and the resistance that these pivots provide. How good are they? Well, let's just put some numbers on here for you. So hopefully I can write on this pretty well. Now the main pivot has a pretty high, I'm going to put 75% here, but it has a higher percentage of that. It depends on the currency pairings that you're looking at a little bit, and the year that we've been through. In fact, it's probably riding near an 80% at the moment. But beyond that, then, when we're looking at the pivots either side of that, we've got, I'm going to, as I say, round these figures, we've got around about a 40% chance of either the R1 or the S1 being hit, then just a 20% chance of the S2 or the R2 being hit, and just a 10%, well, it's less than that, it's quite a bit less than that, chance of either the R3 or the S3 being hit. But I just rounded them up to the nearest tens basically. So there you go, there's the stat. So looking at the price action here, this is a great example of pivots in terms of where you've got to be a bit careful here, because, well, you can see how pinched the pivots were on this particular occasion. Because of the calculation of pivots, they tend to be very tight when we've had a very low volatility day, and then much wider, as you can see here, when we've seen higher volatility. So the next day's pivots really are dependent on the previous day's price range, and it really makes sense. And if the volatility is very similar, so will be the pivot ranges. So on that, but on taking that into account, you've got to, there's an element of common sense sometimes, and this is I've been sort of looking at the common sense aspects of things. But when you've got a pinch day like this, I'll always say to the traders when we're planning things out, well, we've got to sort of ignore them a little bit. It doesn't mean to say they won't still retain their stats. It's quite interesting that neither the R2 or the S2 got hit on this day, where it was, you can see how pinched the price action was, how small a range, and yet they still never got hit. But it is a case of using some common sense when you're using them on a daily basis. The other thing is that you've got to consider, are you using these as a day trading tool or something bigger? Now, you can be using them as a swing trading tool. If you look, I would be looking more towards the weekly pivots and monthly pivots in positions and day trades, swing trades. I tend to use the daily pivots for day trading, but I will go down to the 4-hourly pivots as well for day trading occasionally, but mostly looking at the dailies. And the studies I'm showing you here are based on the daily pivot. So I've shared with you some useful stats there in terms of, well, you can see the probability of the market in any given day running up to its R2, for example. It's just a 20% chance of that happening, or down to its S2, just a 20% chance of that happening. So it's low probability, lower probability. However, this is where I'm going to share some extra stats here. There are traders or educators out there which will teach you a method of trading when it breaks the R1 to target the R2, or if it breaks the the S1 here, to trade it back towards the S2. And I was quite sort of looking at the stats here. You can see that it's only a 20% chance that your S2's actually, or R2 is going to be hit, or S2 is going to be hit. So it's a lower probability trade. So I started crunching some numbers a bit more, just to show that these are seen as support and resistance levels. So you've got to bear that in mind, as opposed to targets, although they do provide very, very good targets. For example, well, it is around about 80% chance of either the R1 or the S1 being hit. So 80% chance of one or the other being hit each day, it makes them good targets. So they become very good targets. But how about the R2s and S2s as targets? Well, that's the numbers I've crunched and added on to this particular video. So we know what's good. We know we've got a good probability of the main pivot being hit. We've got a good probability of either or the R2 or S2 being hit. That's around about 80%. We'll call it 80%. Badly drawn 80%. So it's 80% either or. Then the probability of either or the R2 or S2 drops down considerably. It's not the combination or the adding of the two. It's around about 30-ish% overall. Now I did some stats, and I'll just show you with what I looked at here. I looked at it two different ways. One, where the pivot's been hit first, and two, because we've noticed in our trading room that we're quite often seeing the pivot not hit, but the R1 being broken or the S1 being broken first, and then the R2 or S2 being hit before it does anything else. So in other words, instead of coming back and catching or being around the pivot level or touching the pivot, it's literally gone straight out and through its R1 into its R2, for example. So I looked at the stats. I looked at the stats in two ways. Firstly, what's the probability of the pivots being hit first? And secondly, what's the probability if it hasn't been hit and it breaks the R1 or the S1 and hits the S2? And there's quite a significant difference between the two, and it makes one of them much more tradable than the other. Now these stats are still in their rawish form, so there's no strategy set around them. They're just purely in statistical. It's a statistical observation. So there might be things that you do. For example, here it's running through and it's breaking in the later part of the evening. Are you going to trade those when they trade in the later part of the evening, or are you going to have windows in terms of if it's trading? For example, my normal trading window is between 8 and 3. So I'm taking trades between 8 o'clock and 3 o'clock. So that to me is my trading window. Here, statistically, I might actually say, well, I can leave these running a little bit longer because the stats are still good outside of that time. So, and realistically, it's not too difficult to build an automated trader which will trade that for you. So you don't need to be sitting watching the screens. So we've got this situation in. I noticed the probability where it hasn't hit the pivot first is higher. So here's some stats for you then. So where the pivot is hit, where the price has hit the pivot first. Pivot first. And in those cases, you've got just on the same day, just 32% chance of the R1, R2 or S2 being hit, so it's just a 30% chance. Now, to be fair, and I looked at these, and it's important to give a strategy a fair chance, or a stat a fair chance. If that's on the first day, on the spider, if you leave it to run, because some of these they went and did the hit the pivot the next day, and it's sometimes early, and there's a 43% chance. So there is a better chance of just leaving them until they've either hit or they haven't hit. As I said, these are stats. In terms of strategy, you could change things around and improve these numbers slightly. However, here's the thing to help you straight away. Where the pivot hasn't been hit, the stats on the same day sit at 52% chance of it either going to R1 or S1. Whereas if you leave it if you're happy leaving it overnight, it becomes a pretty decent 64% chance of being hit. Which, so you're looking at your stats, you're putting a strategy together. We use the raw stats first. Where should the time be going? Well, I would suggest initially, I mean, a stat of 43%, could you improve on it? Of course you could, or 32%. Yes, you could improve on those by maybe different times. The trouble is, the more you tighten something like this down to get it to work for you, the more you end up sort of with so much criteria, and some of the criteria will knock off the winners and the losers. So it's a difficult one. I'll talk about that on backtesting on another event, another video. But for now, the stats and the time really should be sitting around here in terms of, can you hone this a little bit? But even unhoned, at 64%, if it's already hit the S1 and broken, it starts breaking the S1, the stats of the S2, S1, R1, the stats to the R2, or in the event of it's broken, it's S1 and running down to S2, the stats are better at 64 rollover or 52% same day. I mean, this is much more important because we don't need to close same day. So these numbers are more significant if they hit that level at all. So what I'm suggesting is if this pivot hadn't been hit on this day, I would still be looking at the same level. So the orders and the target levels can be set and left for the next day, or even it may happen, well, maybe early through the Asian session of the next day they may be hit. So this makes more sense for more professional traders at least. So there we go, some extra stats then. So let's just run through and summarize what we've got here then. We know the stats become lower and lower of hitting in any one day for the R1s, R2s, R3s, S1s, S2s, S3s. It's diminishing probability of the price going that far. Doesn't say it mean it won't go that far, and on days like where it's pinched, the probability would be higher that it will go further in terms of it will go into an R2s, S2s, etc. We've got that point. We know we've got a very high probability of the daily pivot being hit. And then when we're looking at targets, we know there's a good probability of either the R1 or the S1 being hit, so we've got good probability there. Then when it comes to looking at trading, when it breaks the R1 or S1, if it has hit the pivot first, if it's already hit the pivot, the probability is quite a bit lower, at just 32% or 43% if you're happy rolling over. And I would suggest you should be happy rolling it over, but it's still only 43%. When price hasn't hit the pivot yet and you're looking at it and it breaks to run towards the R2 or S2, the probability then, leaving on a rollover, is pretty healthy. And it starts at that point, it becomes an interesting calculation for you to do and decide on putting a structure around that for whether you'll trade it or not, for your strategy. So there you go. I thought I would share this with you. I really think that pivots are absolutely brilliant. Of course, being the pivot trader, absolutely essential. I think this sharing of extra numbers here should help you as well in terms of designing your strategies and when you're targeting. I look at targets when I'm looking intraday, and we're looking at targets, and if it's close to an R1, and yeah, I know it's only got a probability of 20%. Okay, I know that it's still got a chance of going into that sort of level and beyond, because look, if it hasn't hit 64, even if it's hit, it's still a 45. Let's say it's around 50% between the two of them ish. So we've got roughly a 50% chance of it hitting within the next day. So there's a decent chance of that happening one way or the other. So there you go. We got stats. Got any questions? Fire them away. Use the comments underneath. If you want more and the information on stat and pivots, etc., just make sure you subscribe. It'll be coming from time to time, as will strategies on how to trade them. I wish you the very best for this, and I will speak to you soon. Trade carefully out there.